Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to After Poured, our special inside look at Poured in PA, the series. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and today we are looking at episode 5 of Poured in PA, the series. It is on YouTube for you to view right now as we speak. So if you're watching this right now, you need to stop. You need to go watch that first so you have some context as to what we're going to be talking about today. Episode 5 of Port and PA, the series, is all about podcasters, all about bloggers, all about influencers. Really, a lot of people that are adding a new layer to the craft beer landscape in Pennsylvania and beyond. And I am actually in this episode, so this one was near and dear to my heart. To help me express just how awesome episode 5 was, as always, I am joined by none other than Nate Kresge, the executive producer of Port and PA, the series with GK Visual. What is up, Nate?
Nothing much, man. Good to see you again.
You too, as always. And how is life in Harrisburg treating you today?
Pretty good. I got a fresh haircut from my girlfriend. I'm enjoying that, and plenty of beer to keep me company. So
you're doing everything.
Yep. And life is slowly starting to open up here, and we're seeing signs of life again.
So episode 5, as we said, is live. It was part of the drop of the first 5 episodes on YouTube of Port and PA, the series. Give us some insight, man. As always, talk about the production of the show, how things came together, and what you guys were looking for as you constructed the entire layout for episode 5.
Yeah, so this was kind of an interesting one for us because it's not like we went to a brewery and we talked to the owner and we found out what they were doing. So this was a little bit more of a concept piece. We knew we wanted to talk to some Instagrammers and podcasters, and we weren't sure how the whole story was going to work together. And then that kind of ballooned from there with people with like blogs, the PA Brew Review and Breweries and PA guys, and the woman at Grist House that handles marketing, and just kind of started collecting all these interviews. And when we got it all back together, I kind of plop it in the hands of my editor and say, hey, make a story out of this. And he's just looking through it. He's like, I don't know. So we talked a lot about it, and his name's Doug, and Doug just found a really nice narrative, I think. And it just kind of wove the whole thing together with, what supports beer, what's marketing beer. And it's not just the breweries anymore. There's a huge underlying factor there, and it's people taking it into their own hands and kind of expressing what they like about beer.
I know I mentioned it in one of the segments that made it into the show about us being on the outer fringe, quote unquote. And a lot of that to me has always been that we have a lot to offer, even though we aren't making beer or actually physically working in a brewery, perhaps as a bartender or waitress, waiter, whatever the role may be. But there's still a lot that we can bring to the table that helps elevate the scene. It helps put a fresh perspective on things. And ultimately, it gives these brewers an extra voice, or breweries an extra voice. And I think you guys did a tremendous job of capturing that and showcasing how there's a lot of entities throughout the Commonwealth doing just that.
Yeah, thanks. And you're right. I think we're blessed to be in Pennsylvania with a ton of great breweries, but we're also blessed to have, guys like you and everybody else that is giving a voice to these breweries and just elevating it to the next level. And I think that's part of what makes Pennsylvania such a great beer state. It's not just the breweries, which are fantastic. It's everybody that loves the beer and is so fanatic about the beer and is trying to lift up the whole industry as a whole.
And you guys obviously are a big part of that, both with the Port and PA documentary and now Port and PA, the series. You're right in that same group with all of us doing the influencing and helping add a new voice to craft beer in Pennsylvania. How do you feel the project, the Port and PA project, both the documentary and the series, have helped push the Pennsylvania beer movement forward?
Well, that's nice of you to say. I mean, I don't think we went into this thinking that we were ever going to be a voice, but you're right. A lot of people have really gravitated towards this Port and PA brand and followed what we've been doing. It's really humbling and really cool. the number one thing that I love hearing from people is like, oh, I never heard of that brewery before. I've never heard of that beer. I got to go check them out. I got to go try it. And that's exactly what we're looking for here. We're looking to get people out of their element. They may be familiar with the 2 or 3 breweries within their neighborhood, but there's we're like around 400 breweries in the state. There's so much more to explore. So get out there and outside of Pennsylvania, spreading the message outside of PA that, hey, we are a great beer state. Come check us out. Come see what we have to offer.
In what ways do you see the role of the influencer, the blogger, the Instagrammer, the podcaster enhancing the craft beer experience for both the consumer and the industry professionals that are consuming the content?
Yeah, I think it's part of the same thing there, opening the eyes and minds of all the beer drinkers to what else might be out there. And then along with that, you can find out what's new. You can find out what's trending. And sometimes the trending thing might not even be a good aspect of it, but it does happen where a beer will take off for a cool can art or a cool story behind it or a cool collaboration. But we wouldn't know about it except it's showing up on Instagram. It's showing up on my Facebook feed. Somebody's podcasting about it. So it's pretty cool to find out all these stories. I'm here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You're in Pittsburgh. Sometimes we live in our own bubble of what's going on here locally, but all you need to do is hop on social media and you're finding out everything that's going on. So it's pretty cool that way.
Now, personally, I love podcasts. I love reading the blogs, video. I don't know. I don't know if there's a term that lumps all of those things together. I know audiophile is good for podcasters. What do you consider yourself? Do you dig the podcast? Are you more into video? Do you prefer
I'm
reading?
so visual. I mean, I'm always on Instagram checking out video. When I'm listening to podcasts, then I'm, if I'm driving in my car, but I'll be honest, during this whole time, I haven't had a lot of time driving lately. Been kind of stuck at home.
Yeah.
So I gravitate a little bit more to, social media, but I still do love my podcast when I'm traveling or, I'm getting out. But it's hard for me to focus a lot on the podcast when I'm just at home. But listen, I've learned a lot through podcasts. I didn't know much about the Fresh Fest scene and stuff like that until I started listening to your podcast and obviously the Drinking Partners podcast. So that opened up my eyes there. We get a lot of ideas from stories from podcasts and things like that we're hearing guests talk about what they're doing. And so the breweries and PA guys, we're always finding out different things that are going on in the state from them too. So I think we all kind of feed off each other and find out what's going on and just elevate everything from that.
I feel the need to point out that the segue from me to Ed and Day on episode 5 ends with me making this comment that no one wants to listen to a bunch of people chug beer and then record a podcast. Now, I have to defend that statement because I think when I look at it in the context of the video, it's like, wait a minute, that's what Ed and Day do, and their podcast is freaking awesome. I know I stated this. If you go back, you can dig it up in the YouTube or on the YouTube playlist of After Poured. I had said when we were talking after we got done recording, I had said that if you can control it, it's great. But when you've got about 15 people on a microphone trying to record a podcast, I mean, and the one that always comes to mind for me that earlier in my podcasting days, we did one from the Goodwood Festival, which is a great barrel-aged beer event here in Pittsburgh. I know you've been to a couple of those.
Oh, yeah, so good, yeah.
It's one of my favorite events because I love barrel-aged beer, and it's always a good gathering of people. It's not a huge event, so it's just the right size. And we did a podcast, and I'll never forget, right before we were starting to record, Jill, who worked for Wiggle Whiskey at the time, lined up 3 shots of whiskey for me. She was like, you need to do these before you hit the start button. I'm like, well, that's it. And the rest of the night was a shit show. And and everybody else that we were pulling in had been drinking barrel-aged beers throughout the night. And there's 3 different conversations being captured at once on the microphones. It's nuts. It's so hard to consume that. And that's like, as I've gotten more experience in this game, I've realized that from experience that it's fun when you're recording it, but when you're on the end of the listener, something like that is tough to consume. But when you've got something like Ed and Day where everybody's drinking and having a great time and they're going back and forth with jokes, and it's just an awesome environment, it makes for a fantastic show to be a part of and a fantastic show to listen to at the same time.
Well, it's also intimidating being on with those guys because they're so used to drinking, riffing off of each other. You're throwing in with 2 comedians, and you're just trying to keep up. And they had me on one time, and I had a great time. But man, you're just sitting there like it's like a tennis match, trying to like, do I get in here? And it's a lot of fun. If you haven't listened to their thing, definitely check it out. But it works for them. I can't imagine there's too many other podcasters that would be the same experience, drinking that much and then being able to carry a conversation. Worth listening to anyway, I should say.
Well, on that same vein, tell us a funny story about the recording process. What was something that happened when you were interviewing all of us, quote unquote, influential people? What's a good memory that you can share with us today?
Well, I don't know if there's too many funny things that happen. I think everybody's pretty funny just putting them in front of the camera. You put a bunch of podcasters that aren't used to being in front of a camera right away, it's somewhat funny. I mean, we always joke that we're behind the camera for a reason. I end up doing this because nobody else in my office wants to do it. Well,
gee, thanks, Nate.
Hey, listen, you're great. I'm stumbling along. I keep a beer here on my side for liquid courage. And I think Sarah would do great here, and has obviously she's been on here and has done great. But they throw me out here, and I try to stumble my way through these. But I can't with this episode. I can't remember a specific really funny story, but I think the funny thing for me was shooting all these random interviews and then dropping them in the lap of my editor and say, here you go, try to figure out what this episode is all about. So, and he did a great job. He really did.
Yeah, I think it turned out great. I think it's funny that when you listen to the podcast that you and I recorded in my studio basement, which is where we shot the interview, we did my podcast first, which I believe is episode 14. So if you guys want to go check out breakingbrews.com/podcast, jump on to episode 14. You can hear me and Nate going back and forth about the documentary. I think that was where you dropped the news first and foremost, or first ever, that this was going to be a series that was developing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then we did my interview after that, and we had been drinking since, about 2 PM that day.
Yeah.
I don't think you ever would have known. I think we both did a great job keeping it together.
Yeah. Professionals here. Professionals.
That's right. Yeah. You get used to this kind of stuff. And when the light goes on, you know how to shine. So episode 5.
Well, go ahead. When we're on the too at breweries, they're constantly handing us beers. And I will tell you a funny story about shooting the documentary if you want.
Absolutely.
That same conversation. When we travel, we try to pack in a day and try to get as much into a day as we possibly can. And when we were shooting the film, our producer Sarah was pregnant, so she wasn't drinking beer. She might have a little taste here and there, but she was relying on us to finish all these beers that would constantly be put in front of all 3 of us. And so I was out on the road in Pittsburgh with Sean, and Sean and I are, just finishing beers, and of course we're at East End, and they're just like lining up beers, having a great time. So that so we did what we could. I forget what our we had a second shoot that day. At lunch, the guys at East End were like, you got to go to this one bar, it's so cool. So we went there. We had a couple beers at lunch, and then we go to the second shoot. We survived that somehow. And when I'm in Pittsburgh, I'm a big bourbon drinker too. Equal parts bourbon, equal parts beer, I guess, for me. And Butcher the Rye is always a stop for me. So I said, we're going to go to dinner and Butcher the Rye. Well, I between our last shoot and dinner, I went and took a nap just to try to sleep this off a little bit. And Sean met up with a buddy from college and had a couple beers before dinner. Well, by the time I was up, I was ready for dinner. I was good. Sarah, obviously, hadn't been drinking all day. And we met in the lobby of the hotel, and there was Sean. We couldn't find him anywhere. And all of a sudden, I look out the front door. He's sprinting across the street from another bar to make the time. So we go to dinner, and he's just cracking us up the whole night. and we're in our Uber ride home after we had all been drinking all day, but the added bourbon and everything. Sean's talking with our Uber driver, asking him who his top 5 favorite pop stars are. He's like, Britney Spears and mine all the way. Just I don't think this Uber driver knew what he was getting into, and Sean just kept talking about Britney Spears. It was a good night.
That sounds like the most epic Uber ride ever.
Yeah. And the Uber driver, I'm sure they're used to everything. That's probably a tame story for an Uber driver, I'm sure. But for us, being able to, have fun and shoot at the same time, it works, but might not for everybody.
Well, whatever recipe you guys have found and stumbled upon, it's working great for you. As we saw as evidence in episode 5 and the other 4 episodes plus the documentary, you guys have some great content out there. For you watching this right now, again, if you haven't watched episode 5 of Poured in PA, the series, you can jump over to the Poured in Pennsylvania YouTube channel and check that out. We're going to come back in just a minute, and we're going to talk with the entire crew from the Beer Busters podcast right here on After Poured. Stay tuned.
Philadelphia,
Pittsburgh,
Lancaster County,
York County, Washington County,
Hershey, Elizabethtown, Carlisle, Harrisburg.
Like, bruh, let me explain the concept of beer festival.
We're always creative in the beer and the products that we make. Look, we can be creative in business too. We don't just have to be creative in beer.
Collaboration is so fun and it's so exciting. Most beautiful things come out of collaboration.
It's the camaraderie that you see with our breweries. They do not compete against each other. They compete together.
Everything about the podcast is about collaboration. It's about, you doing something good. I have a platform. We talk about what you do because I rocks with it.
There are just some occasions that call for a beer, and that can't be replaced.
Welcome back to After Poured. I'm Jason Cercone, and we are talking episode 5 of Poured in PA, the series, all about podcasters and bloggers and influencers and all the good folks in Pennsylvania adding a new layer to the craft beer landscape. We've got a full house here for the next part. We are joined by all 3 members of the Beer Busters podcast. We've got Steph, we've got Dan, we've got Wayne, and of course, we've got Nate joining us still. What is up, everybody?
Hey, how are you? How's it going?
Welcome to After Poured. So, obviously, you guys have watched episode 5 of the show. What are your thoughts? What did it feel like to be on the big screen?
Well, that was definitely the first episode I watched, even though it's the 5th one.
Oh, I did the same.
Went straight for it.
Yeah,
because I knew we were in it.
I think everybody.
I watched them in order.
Of course you did. Steph would watch them in
Thank
order.
you, Steph.
I'm curious. I wonder what everybody else did. I mean, I wonder if people watched based off of like, hey, I know somebody that was in episode 3. I'm going to start with that and jump around, or if they just went 1 through 5. Like, good.
Yeah, it's not like a storyline you have to follow the whole way through. I mean, you watch it however you want to watch it. I'm not going to dictate that.
Thank you for that. We appreciate the freedom to watch and bid as we please.
That's good to know. Well, yeah, we also got a bit of a preview before the official release. We got a link now. I think we were able to see that episode a little bit before it actually officially published, because I remember watching it, I think, before the announcement went out that it was on YouTube. So that's my reasoning for going to our episode first, because I could.
It was the best one. I mean,
well, obviously, I mean, right? Yeah, obviously, it's super cool, and I mean, it is kind of surreal because, like, even like doing this right now, we're used to the ones doing the interviewing. We're used to the ones coming up with questions and asking people, and our episode, our interview was recorded at Little Big Beer Fest, which we've done every year since the beginning. Where we just kind of grab brewers or whoever's pouring or just friends to sit down and do 5-10 minute segments on the podcast. So we were in that mode. So then to sit down and then start, asking questions in front of the camera was kind of different, but really cool to see our faces in HD on YouTube.
Yeah, I thank the power of editing for GK Visual making this look good.
I liked the theme.
No longer just a face for podcasting.
Amen to that, my friend.
I will say I didn't like that I had to put makeup on for this. I like that our podcast is just audio and not video. So that was a little stressful. But to get back to episode 5, Jason, I liked how Nate used it as an influencers episode. I have to say, the three of us have been doing this podcast now for over 7 years, and it's only been very recently that I've kind of thought of us even as influencers, and I still am very uncomfortable using that term to describe us. But I feel like maybe earlier on we felt like we could influence brewers a little more because we could encourage them to make the beers we wanted. Like, I'd like to think I had a little bit to do with more lagers appearing in my local breweries. But I think even more so, I have realized that what we say on the podcast and what we say on social media and what we check in on Untappd, that does influence what other people choose to drink and the breweries that other people choose to visit. So I think I've become a lot more mindful of what I'm posting and what I'm saying about beer, but also making sure that I'm being true to myself and being honest with what I enjoy to drink. Since the beginning, we've always talked about how we would never speak badly about a brewery or a beer on the podcast, but we will always be honest about what we're drinking and what we enjoy drinking.
Clearly, podcasts have taken off, not just in the beer world, but all over the place. Podcasts are one of the most popular growing mediums on the planet. And I know I consume them daily, whether it's a beer podcast or whatever I'm into on that specific day or that particular day. In regards to your guys' podcast, as you said, you've been doing it for quite a while. Obviously, you've got a nice little niche carved out in the Eastern Pennsylvania market. How do you feel podcasts have changed and helped the beer landscape evolve over the years?
I think it's good that you can get a lot of different voices in that space very, very easily. I mean, I went to broadcasting school. I worked in radio for a while, and to try to start this then would have been a very different undertaking. But nowadays, anybody with a USB mic and a couple of words to say can set up their own podcast, which, may work out for the worst, but overall, I think it's for the better because you have more voices and it can really bring to light a lot of things about a community like the beer community that you wouldn't have thought otherwise. We always did it as something that was like, we want to know more about, obviously we want to talk about the beer, try the beer, but we also want to know the people and the stories behind the beer, behind the businesses. And I think it can do a lot of good to bring those stories to it. Or, lately there's been a lot of political things happening in the news, a lot of, very heavy subjects. And it's a way to put a different perspective on a lot of those things so a smaller part of the community can still talk about a larger issue. Or we can all just, have fun and get drunk together.
That's fun too.
Whatever happens
That's never
first.
happened before, has it?
Oh, no, not at all. Never. And I've never been drunk in my life.
It's funny because, you mentioned about, using our podcast as a way to present the people behind the breweries, which isn't something like we didn't set out for that as like our mission statement. And it was only maybe a year or two ago that someone made that comment of our show, like, you give a face to the brewery. Like, a lot of people, they drink the beers, they have their favorite breweries, but they don't know the people who own it. They don't know the people who founded it. They don't know the people who are brewing those beers. And, we just sort of organically ended up doing that sort of thing with the podcast. But ever since that was actually pointed out, it makes a lot of sense that I think that's a big part of the value is that, a lot of times when you enjoy a product, you don't get to know the people who make that product. You don't always meet the chef at your favorite restaurant. So and most people who own and run breweries are just really cool people and are fun to talk to and hang out with. So it really does kind of put a face and a personality to the brand, which is cool.
I think something that has changed greatly since we started the podcast is everybody now has an opinion about craft beer. Everyone sort of feels like they're an expert in their own right. So I think that we give a platform for brewers and brewery owners to share their side of the story and even share their own opinions about beer and the beers that they enjoy brewing and their opinions about the beer drinker sharing their opinions. We've had brewers get quite candid with us about their opinions of platforms like Untappd or social media and the things that people are posting. So I think it gives the brewer a chance to, I don't want to say like talk back at them, but maybe to defend themselves a little bit and share their side of the story. So I think that brewers see podcasts, especially beer-centered podcasts, as a platform for them to speak their opinion and share their stories.
And I know you guys had mentioned this on episode 5 about how brewers will spend their time in the breweries when they're doing a lot of that work, the quote unquote mindless work, like cleaning kegs and doing all these things that they have to do on a normal or on a regular day. They get to fill their ears with these podcasts, and it's good that you can put a good product out there for them to listen to. And it's ends up reciprocating quite nicely when they will come on your show and share their story. And then in return, they can listen to your show and pick up stories from countless other people in the industry. It's great stuff, and podcasts give everybody the ability to do that.
And there's
Go ahead, Steph.
I was going to just say, there's even breweries that are now starting their own podcasts, which I think is really cool that they're using their brand and adding that platform to what they offer the public.
I know I had said that to a brewery that I work with, that they should do a podcast instead of a newsletter. Looking at it now, maybe do both, but I always thought a podcast coming straight from a brewery and giving the perspective from that end was a great way to reach your audience, and it's a whole new way to reach your audience. So it's really cool to see breweries taking that idea and running with it.
Yeah, and it amazes me, and I think you find the same thing in a lot of internet media in general, whether it's like YouTubers or podcasters of all different subjects, how much people are willing to just listen to, you know, other people talk about something. Like, we're not famous, we're not celebrities before, you know, we didn't start a podcast. It's not, you know, a lot of celebrities start a podcast and they get a following because of that. But just having this sort of like personal media on the internet, it's really cool to see that there is actually a market for people who just want to hear opinions, who don't necessarily, you know, you don't need to have a celebrity on your show or your YouTube channel in order to make content that people are into.
Absolutely.
Did you guys listen to a lot of podcasts before you got into doing this?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Not Steph.
Steph, no?
Yeah.
No, I did not listen to a single podcast prior to starting Beer Busters with Dan.
Do you listen to any podcasts now?
Not on the regular, honestly.
Really? Wow.
When I'm traveling, like in the car for hours and hours and hours, I do listen to Stickman Brews. I will listen to their podcast because they crack me up. That's probably the only podcast that I loyally listen to. I don't even listen to our podcast. I will listen to Last Call, and I'll watch the punishment videos, and sometimes I'll listen to the outtakes. But I'm a little too hard on myself when I listen to the actual episodes. But if I listen to one, it's to like refresh my memory if we're recording with a repeat guest, to kind of remember what we talked about before. But yeah, I wasn't a big, and still am not a big podcast listener.
I listen to a ton of podcasts and have for years. Yeah. So the idea of being on one was always like, yeah. I remember having to tell people what a podcast was early on. Like, I do a beer podcast. What does that mean? You know?
What radio station is that on? How can I listen to that?
Yeah. It's kind of funny.
Where
but
can
yeah,
I see you?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you don't want to. You can't, and you don't want to. But to your point earlier about, you know, one thing we've seen in the last several years, you know, when we started out doing this, there weren't a whole lot of beer podcasts out there. There was less podcasts in general. And now over the past, you know, 7+ years, seeing the number of craft beer focused podcasts just continue to grow and grow, which, you know, you think, oh, that's competition, but much like other breweries, it's not really, you know, because people who listen to podcasts listen to more than one podcast, right. You know, so it's kind of, you know, rising tide kind of thing. So
very similar to what we see in the beer industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody helping out one another to make each other's show grow.
Right.
So obviously now we are operating in different times in all facets of our lives. How have you guys had to change things up with how you record episodes of Beer Busters with everything going on with the coronavirus pandemic?
We usually end up going on site to different breweries or, you know, events that we record at, which is also something in the beginning we didn't really set out to do. It just kind of happened, and then it became our thing.
It was a necessity, really.
Yeah, because we couldn't really get professional brewers to come to one of our basements to record with 3 people who they didn't know. It kind of sounded murdery.
To interject, as I said, back in 2013, you had to explain what a podcast was to someone just to get them to listen, to get them to be a guest on the show.
Yeah.
To expect people to, you know, because we recorded in Steph's basement, to expect people to drive to.
Nate can vouch. I've got a basement studio.
He didn't kill me. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when he let me through his garage.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair,
it's well lit. I've had men and women both say
I let a few people know where I was.
Felt quite comfortable.
One thing we
before
do,
everybody came.
We do still do episodes in Steph's basement once in a while if it's somebody who's not from a brewery. Like we had the Breweries and PA guys on, another set of influencers out there in the beer world. They don't really have a space; they have a virtual business. But we do set the ambience because she's got fluorescent lighting, so we turn that off and we have a little lamp lighting. And we started doing it because it created a hum in the audio. But now we do it just to freak people out because the lights turn down and they're in a basement and they're like,
you get the Dexter light spot,
right
on top of the table, and
exactly.
But to go back to your original question of how is this time changed everything, obviously we can't go on location at this point, so we have to do it virtually, much like we're doing this. We'll pull up. We don't use Zoom. We tend to use Google Hangouts just because we've been using it for years. But we'll bring people on, try to do it that way. We'll talk about what we're drinking. We'll still do a trivia game. Wayne usually does a trivia game in the episodes. We try to keep that going just to lighten it up a little bit. But it's definitely a different vibe. I think we're all more used to it now because it's been, 3 months?
Yeah, we've got several episodes out now that are post-quarantine.
But the first few were really rocky because we didn't know how it was going to go.
It's weird. And we didn't, my initial concern was that how are we going to fill in the time? Like we usually release, to some people's dismay, but episodes that average close to 2 hours in length. And now we only release bi-weekly, so you have 2 weeks to listen to it. But my first concern when we started doing remote recordings was like, are we going to fill out the time? Or are we going to run out of things to say? We're not all going to be drinking the same beer, so we're not going to be talking about the beers, in that kind of back and forth sort of way. But, when you get a group of we're all family, the three of us. So we've known each other our whole lives. And the people we've been having on during quarantine are people we know pretty well in the industry and have had talked to before on the podcast. So when you get around a group of friends and you start cracking some beers and talking, whether it's, over a video call or in person, you don't run out of things to say. And so that fear kind of went away pretty quick. And we actually ran long like we normally do, even when we were sitting at home doing it remotely. So
the hardest change has been the end. When we have finished recording the episode and finished recording last call, and then we say goodbye and we close our devices, and that's it. One of the best things about recording, especially on site, is the breakdown time when we're putting our equipment away and we're, chat. By then we know our guests really well, even if it was the first time they were on our show, and we're just drinking more beer and hanging out. And there are times that many times we've been in the breweries well after they've been closed to the public, and that time is pretty special, and we're missing out on that. That's something that's been kind of hard, but I've been really proud of the content that we continue to release, and I think it was important for the three of us to continue to release content with so many people being at home, to provide our listeners with consistency. And I hope that they're enjoying, though we're trying to keep sort of our normal lineup, but it's definitely not. It's definitely more loose and conversational, and we get goofy and silly, I think even more so because none of us have to drive, so none of us are paying attention to our alcohol intake. But so we've adapted well, but I will admit the end is kind of rough when we just hit end call and we miss out on that time.
Yeah, because normally we take our headphones off and we're all still there. Now when we're done, we take our headphones off and we all basically disappear.
Yep.
And we're just by ourselves again, and it is, that is one of the weirdest things.
And with being able to drink a little more and not being able to drive, I can't tell you how many more hangovers I've had since we've been recording at home. There was an episode we were recording. Apparently I just left and the screen went black and nobody heard from me again until the next day.
Yeah, that was concerning because Dan and I are roommates, as you can see, we're together right now. But at that time, I was staying with my girlfriend, and so I was remote as well. Dan was doing the actual recording on his end. So when he got drunk and passed out and disappeared, none of us knew if the episode was still recording or not. We just had to go on faith and keep talking.
Turns out it recorded all 5 hours of people talking.
And he doesn't remember changing into a suit.
Oh, God. Yep.
Singing to us with his guitar. He may have done some stand-up that night. There's some great Dan content that he doesn't remember.
The only part of that last call I went back and listened to was me doing the stand-up because I remember being made fun of for it. So I wanted to see how bad it actually was. And you were right to make fun of me.
What, if I may ask, what were you drinking?
Lots of beer. So here's the thing. That episode, we had on Brandon Armstrong, who's now with Haymaker Meadery, and John Stemler from Free Will Brewing. And we've known them for a very long time. But one of my favorite beers on this planet is COB from Free Will. They had a rum barrel-aged version of it called Brown Beard, which I had 2 bottles of. I think it was 2016 and 2017. But I'd been saving them for so long that I forgot about them until John happened to be on our quarantine episode of the podcast. So I opened them up and I did a side-by-side, and I remember this part, but I don't remember them being over 10% each.
Yeah, they're like 11% alcohol, and those weren't the. I mean, you had beers before that.
Yep, I had mead. I had beer of whatever was in the kegerator at the time. Like I let loose.
Funky dishwasher.
It was probably that.
Well, that is the piece of the puzzle we needed, and everything.
What's everybody drinking right now? I'm just curious.
I've got Love City Lager from Love City Brewing here in Philly.
Hey, I got a Love City right here too.
Yes.
Oh,
nice. I just bought that for a friend of mine the other day.
I got the Workforce IPA from Workhorse, which benefits the Restaurant Workers Association for all the people in food service that are suffering.
You can catch that in episode 6. We do a little story on that beer coming out soon.
I'm drinking really cool. Black Currant Stout from St. Boniface, mourning that Bonifest is not happening.
Oh yeah.
I've got water because I had a lot of Spoonwood and Levity beers at Cookout yesterday.
Oof.
Oh.
So I'm taking it easy today as we sit and record. Well, Nate, I might as well ask you now, because we've been doing on consecutive Mondays since Poured in PA the series came out. We've been doing the release of episodes 1 through 5 of After Poured, this being episode 5. When are we going to see episode 6? And tell us what it's all about. Give us a little preview.
Well, by the time this is up, it should be out, I would say. So this is an interesting episode because it's the first one that we have done. We'll have a mix of stories, some shot during the pandemic, so will look very similar to what you're watching right now, and a story from prior to the pandemic with Allison Feeney. So it's a nice mix of stories. It's we talked to Workhorse about what they've done to adapt during this time with the Workforce beer, which is a really cool story. We follow up again with Harrisburg Beer Week and what goes into canceling an event. What does that look like to actually cancel something that's just a month or less away from being kicked off? And then the Allison Feeney story, and then we catch up with Brooks Amauer for our spotlight. He opened a brewery during this time, so that's an interesting story in itself.
Cool. All right. Well,
fun fact as a side note with Brooks Hamauer, he is our next episode to go live is a full episode with Brooks. Shameless promotion. So the next episode of Beer Busters will also have Brooks on it.
But also, to be fair, Nate's on that one.
Yeah, he's on that one too.
Yes. And Nate.
I didn't even plug it. Thanks, guys.
It's the least we could do.
Got it.
Well, I guess we'll have episode 6 of After Poured sooner than I thought. I guess I can't take that vacation after all. Guys, tell me where we can get Beer Busters. Where can our fans listen to the show?
Well, there's always there's beerbusterspodcast.com, but you can get it in pretty much every app that you can get any other podcast in. iTunes, Stitcher, iHeart Media, Radio, whatever they're calling it.
Yeah, we're eventually going to have to get used to this. It's Apple Podcasts, not iTunes. Apple Podcasts.
True.
All right?
I should have known.
The ghost of Steve Jobs is going to come for us if we don't.
Well, I've got a bone to pick with him anyway. But you can, wherever you get podcasts, chances are that we're there. We're on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Beer Busters on both. Facebook, it's Beer Busters Podcast. And if you haven't listened before and you tune in and you decide you really like it, we mentioned something throughout this interview called Last Call. That is an exclusive just to our patrons. If you are a patron at patreon.com/beerbusters, you can get access to a special feed to Last Call, just extra bonus content. And we also do punishment videos when we're allowed to go places. So that trivia game that we do during the episode, whoever loses that gets punished in some way, whether it's a terrible concoction or a beer that's, there was one from like the mid 80s that somebody had on from a.
Brooks actually brought a vintage 1995 can of Coors Light.
That's right.
As a punishment beer that Steph had to drink.
Didn't he find it in his backyard or something?
You know, he got it from another dad when he was trick-or-treating with his kids. And he was like, oh, I got something for you. And he pulled out, a can of Coors Light. And it looked like it was from 1995.
There was a punishment.
I just threw away the old Four Loko I had in my fridge from the original Four Loko. So
wow, that would have been a good one.
That for you.
Yeah. Well, we also had
cool.
Yeah.
Brian Mills brought an old beer.
Oh, the baseball beer.
That's right. Yeah.
That might have been what Dan was thinking.
Yeah. I don't think it was quite the 80s, but it was close. It was like early 90s.
Yeah, that was another beer from the 90s.
Yeah. So if you listen and you like it and you feel like being a patron, those are some of the bonus things you get. But, either way, the regular show is available wherever you can find podcasts.
Good stuff. Well, guys, thanks for joining us here on After Poured. It was great to talk about how influential we all are to the beer industry, especially you guys doing your podcast over in Philly, Breaking Brews happening over here whenever I feel like getting it up and running again. We'll see what happens there.
Hopefully
we will
soon.
have to do a collaboration episode sometime.
Absolutely.
East meets West.
I like this.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It's amazing we haven't done this yet. We absolutely
right?
have to make this happen.
Does that make you Tupac and us Biggie?
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I guess. In so many different ways. All right, guys. Thanks again for tuning in for episode 5 of After Poured. If you have not done so yet, you totally did this backwards. Jump over to YouTube, watch episode 5 of Poured in PA, the series talking all about bloggers, podcasters, influencers, and all sorts of great folks doing beautiful things in the beer industry without actually making the beer themselves. Good stuff to watch. And also episodes 1 through 4, if you haven't done that, catch up on those on the Poured in Pennsylvania channel. And episode 6 coming soon, as per our friend Nate Kresge, which means episode 6 of After Poured will be coming your way soon too. Until then, I'm Jason Cercone, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.